Just need to hear me now. Perfect.
Yeah.
Right, fingers crossed that it's going to work this time. So yeah, we're going to be talking all about Microsoft Teams sprawl. So just a little bit about me. So I'm from the UK. I'm a principal cloud architect and Microsoft MVP, and I work for an organization called Cloudway. It's a Microsoft Gold partner, and there's just 10 of us in the company. It's a very small company, and we're all focused about Microsoft 365 security and productivity. And I really specialize in the governance and compliance world, and it is really balancing that need between productivity and governance. And I've lost the screen again. Can you still see it?
No, it just dropped at the same time.
I would try maybe not doing PowerPoint live.
Okay,
We'll see.
Oh, it's back.
It's back.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah, so I specialize in sort of that governance and compliance. So it is balancing that need of security and productivity, because all too often I think IT get their hands on Microsoft 365 and say, oh, this is a big scary world in the cloud. They're used to managing their servers and all of their other technology, and then handing over responsibility to end users is quite scary. So it's a case of about how can we manage that. And I think with particularly with Teams, a lot of companies switched it on during the pandemics. They've had 2 years of often ungoverned use, and now we're getting lots of requests to say, come and help us. I blog on a website. It's easy to remember. It's nikkichapple.com. So it's my name. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter as well. And I'm really trying to provide that pragmatic advice based on real customer scenarios that I have about how we can make things more efficient, more effective, and kind of quick wins for Teams and Microsoft 365. So you can scan the QR code there, and that will just take you to my blog, because I have posted on some of the things we're going to talk about today. So the agenda is, first of all, why does Teams sprawl occur? Then the biggest risks of Teams sprawl, why do we need to worry about it? Then I have the 5 A's of Teams governance, things to think about. And then we'll actually go in and actually look at some of the features and functionality within Microsoft 365 that we can use to govern Teams. And the reason I say Microsoft 365 rather than Teams is because, you know, Teams is really a front door to Microsoft 365. You know, you're using Azure AD, you're using SharePoint. So you need to think about Teams in a wider context. So we'll talk about the creation, the identity governance of members and guests, and a little bit about the lifecycle management. So why does Teams sprawl occur? Well, the first thing is often it's rushed implementation, and this is particularly with the pandemic, with COVID. People just switched on Teams overnight. They didn't have that time to prepare and everything, and now people want to kind of go back and say, we want to implement it properly. Often there's no user training with a lot of IT projects. You know, it's run by IT. They just think, oh, it's easy, everyone will know what to do. But in the real world, people need to know what's happening. You know, user adoption is key. You know, it's always people, process, and technology. Technology is just a tool at the end of the day. So making sure you know those use cases and appropriate training. Lack of discoverability is another thing. You can't see private teams if you're not a member of one of those teams. So you often find duplicates because people don't think a team exists, or it does. No life cycle management. This is the key, really. It's really easy to create a team. You know, if you haven't got any particular controls, a user can go and create a team. But who actually goes around and proactively removes a team, deletes a team when the project ends? They tend to just stay there forever. It's a bit about same as kind of your email. So many organizations just keep emails forever or keep files forever. You know, Teams is going that same way. So we need some controls. And no monitoring. You know, it's something that you do need to kind of proactively monitor, make sure best practices are being adhered to. So really what it comes down to, if you don't have governance, you're going to get Teams sprawl. So really the biggest risks of Teams sprawl and why we need to worry about this is, one, You get stale and duplicate content, because you've got that content is kind of a bigger risk, 10 times as much data, 10 times as much of a data risk should you have a breach. So you get that data also overexposure as well. So that's another risk. If people aren't sure of who's in what team, people might put data into the wrong team. So a real example here, a UK university, somebody in the finance team was working on the pay rises for the academic staff. They wanted to share the file in the finance team, and they posted it in the finance team, but unfortunately they posted it in the wrong finance team. It was a finance team for the students, so therefore kind of sensitive information about people's pay and everything was exposed to the wrong groups of people. So if you haven't got that naming convention right, it's quite easy to get it wrong. So data loss as well, particularly if you've got guests in teams. Do people really know what they should be sharing in the teams? Do people know whether there's even guests in the team? A lot of time people don't. And ultimately, it all just gets too confusing, I think. You know, there's too many teams that people have to search through. It turns people off teams, and people will go elsewhere. And this is where you get kind of shadow technology. It is just so easy to download apps onto your mobile phone devices. So, you know, big one for me is WhatsApp. Speak to so many companies. Oh, it's all just too confusing. We'll just go to WhatsApp. We can do what we like there. You know, as soon as you use something like that, you've lost control of everything. So ultimately, it just ends up in chaos, just too difficult, too complicated to manage. So therefore, we need Teams governance. So it's not just about technology. So I've got this thing, remember the 5 A's. So the first thing is about accountability. You know, with Teams, we're making the team owners accountable for those teams. Now, that is a mind shift for a lot of people in IT. They are used to managing the IT applications, the technology, everything. So to hand over that technology to the team owners is difficult. A lot of organisations don't even have team owner training. So really, the team owners need to know what they're accountable for. They own the assets in there. They should be owning who joins the team and when it comes to the end of the life. Adoption. So it comes down into good adoption. So finding out those really good use cases, when a team should be used, how it can be used effectively. Should it just be a channel? Is it only a Teams chat, or should an email work better? So it's really knowing what to use when. We need to analyze where we are and what we're doing. So it's important to look at, are your teams being used? When were they last accessed? You know, have you got guests in the team that shouldn't be in the team? Are there confidential teams that have got guests in them, etc.? You've always got to do those reviews. So unless you've kind of really bought a third-party governance tool that puts a lot of those controls in place, you really do need to analyze it. And even with the third-party tools, they all come with a reporting section, so you can look at those edge cases and those anomalies and address them. And it's then taking action. So it's keeping on top of all of that, having a regular process to make sure that your rules, your rule book is being followed. And then trying to look at, are there ways that we can automate this? So rather than have a manual process to say, this is our naming standard and hope people follow the rules, what can we put in place to try and automate some of this? So it's like a funnel. If we control the quality of the information being created when we create a team, it makes it easier to govern. If it's just free for all and there are no rules and anyone can create teams with any naming standards for any purpose, then you know your problem is started at the beginning. So it's kind of having that filtered approach. So now really we're going to look at some of the functionality within Microsoft 365 that we can use, and on some areas where we may be able to kind of automate and make things a little bit simpler on this process. So we're going to look at Teams creation first. We're looking at 4 things. Sensitivity labels that you can apply to Teams, sites, Microsoft 365 groups. We've got naming standards. If you've got Azure AD Premium 1 licenses, we've got Teams templates, and I'm just showing you how you can extend it with Power Automate as well. So sensitivity labels for groups, teams and sites. So people are often familiar with the sensitivity labels that you can add to your file and have, like, confidential, strictly confidential, for public use, etc. Well, there are labels that you can actually use with your groups, teams and sites, and it can control a number of things. So it'll control your privacy. Do you want a team to be private or public? You can decide at a team level whether you want guests in the team. Now, this is really important because when you enable guest access, what you're actually doing is saying any of my teams can have guests added to them. And by default, when you create a team, the sharing is new and existing guests, unless you've configured it differently. So the issue is that potentially you can be sharing any of your data with anybody outside. So sensitivity labels is my number one priority, just to ensure that you only add guests to the teams you want, and you only allow external sharing of the content with teams that you want as well. And you can retrospectively add these labels to all your existing teams as well. So you can do that by PowerShell quite quickly. You can also control access from unmanaged devices. So if you're using Intune and say like hybrid joined Windows computers, etc., you can say, well, with the corporate assets, you can have one particular access. If you're working from home on your home computer or your personal cell phone device, you may want to limit people's access. You can control that. You can also put conditional access controls around things as well. So maybe if you've got a strictly sensitive team, you might want to push out a terms of use to say there's some particular rules around this. You might want to block access from unmanaged devices, etc. So you can put tighter rules around. And there's a couple of controls here that you can control just via the PowerShell settings. So that's site sharing and the sharing link. Can somebody share the whole of the SharePoint site with somebody outside the team? And do you want the file sharing link to be edit or view only? So it's quite a lot of control. So for me, this is kind of the number one thing that you should do if you haven't already implemented it, is get the sensitivity labels in, even if you only have two. One that locks it down for internal users and another one where you allow external guests. So here's kind of just a screen that just shows a little bit more about all the different controls there. So it gives you lots of granularity. The key thing here is these are for labels for groups, teams and sites. They don't actually label the individual files. So you still do need to label the files as well. There are different settings. The next thing that you can do is you can apply naming standards. So that's kind of really important for a lot of organisation, particularly if you're working across different countries. So, for example, if you've got a marketing and sales team and you've got one in the US and another one in the UK, for example, you don't really want them both to be called marketing and sales. You might want to have the country or something after the name. Now, you can use the Azure AD group naming policy for that. It can take information from your user profile. So I've got a screenshot of it here. It will take things like either your job title, department, company name, state, country, office, etc. And you can add that as either a prefix, so before the team name or after the name. Downsides of this is a lot of organizations haven't got a strict standard of what's been put in these fields. So, if you've got different naming conventions, you end up with messy information. Even worse, a lot of organizations I've worked with, when we looked at the quality of the data, it was out of date because as part of that joiners, movers, leavers process, it wasn't being kept updated. So it works as long as the data in there is okay. However, a lot of companies want things based on, oh, this is a team for a project, or this is a team for an event, or this is a departmental team. You can't do that with the naming policies. You would have to find another way of doing it. And you can also have blocked words. So that screenshot on the top here, all that is just showing is, you've got sales-UK and sales-US. So that's the type of thing that it would do. Next thing that you've got, and this is available out of the box, is Teams templates. So this allows you to create teams for different types of use cases. Microsoft have a lot already created. However, the majority of them will not be relevant to your industry. So I've got a screenshot of some of them here. So these are the more generic ones, but there's ones in there about managing, I think, a retail store or a bank or a hospital. So my advice is go in, remove all the ones. We have to hide them, actually, the ones that you don't want, and then create your own. So if you want, you could remove all of the Microsoft created ones and build some yourself. Now, for me, I find the easiest way to create one is to create a team. So just as you would normally create a team, add in your channels, add in any applications. You can put like pictures in your channel names if you want. So all of the things that you want, and then you can use a team as a basis for a Teams template. So this is managed in the Teams admin center, so you can't do it by end users. You do need to be an admin. So that's why often it's better to get the users to create the team structure as they want, and then put the request in for your IT admins to go in and create a template based on that team. But what I found is that the functionality that Microsoft have doesn't normally address the organization's needs. People want to know like an approval process, or they want to know why a team's being created, some form of justification. So you might want to collect metadata, etc. So I have created a blog post. So there's a QR code there if you want to see it in full detail. But it's using Power Automate as a Teams request process. So what you do is you disable the ability for end users to create teams and groups. And you can have something as simple as a Microsoft form. That's in its most simplistic view. You can take what I've done and turn it into a Power App, Logic Apps, etc. But you can just work on a form. You can choose what data you want to capture. That information is then stored on a SharePoint list. So you've got a full audit of everything that you've collected. So here you can have things like multiple owners for the team, which is good. You can create your own naming standards. So for example, in my blog post, it's a team for either a project or an operational team. And depending on which box they tick, either you have the words PROJ or I think it was OP suffixed onto the team name. So you can create stuff, you can use lists, and all I did in the list is I concatenated some fields, etc., to come up with the final team name. You've also got that record as well of that audit. So then we can use Power Automate, and I can go through and I can check to see whether the team name exists, because believe it or not, the Teams functionality, whether you're creating a team as an end user or within the Teams admin center, doesn't have a deduplication process. So unlike creating a SharePoint site or creating somebody's email address where it says, hold on a minute, either the email or the SharePoint site exists, there is no warning in Teams. So you end up with duplicate team names, the display names. The SharePoint site behind the scene will have kind of 3 random numbers after it. So that can cause problems. So we can do duplication checks. We can create teams based on the templates. We can have an approval process in. It might need to go to the manager. It might need to go to a nominated person or IT. We can enforce multiple owners, and we can capture that metadata. So you can create something quite simple, or you can kind of go and buy, third-party solutions out there that do this and far more. So that's just quickly the roundup really of what happens with Teams creation. For me, I would always recommend at least having a Power Automate solution. It works for a small organization. For a larger organization, probably best go for like a third-party solution. So now we've got lots of teams created, and some of these teams are needed for a short time, other ones for a long time, but we need to then manage the members. This is really important when we've got guests. So we're going to look through 5 things here. We've got member access reviews. This needs Azure AD Premium 2 licenses, or part of the kind of E5 suite. Guests lifecycle management. So top tips there. on guest access reviews, I'm going to show you a top tip how you can manage guest access reviews with just only one Azure ADP2 account. Owner list teams and some of the problems. There's two ways of doing that. You can ask the members, or we can do a custom solution with Power Automate. So Azure AD access reviews. So this is for managing access to groups and applications. So these could be Microsoft 365 groups, SharePoint groups, Teams, security groups, etc. So lots of different types of things, but we're just looking at Teams because this is Teams governance. So how this works is you decide how frequently you want to review the membership of your team, and you decide who's going to review it. So in this scenario here, we're going to have all the team owners review the membership of the team. That's the best. The team owners should know who should be in the team. If you ask IT are not going to know who's supposed to be in each team. They'll spend all their time trying to find out from people in the business, should this person be in the team? Team owner is accountable for the team, therefore the team owner should be assessing the membership. So you can review it on a quarterly basis, monthly basis. The process is the notification would go to the team owner that's been as the approver. They decide either for the guests, I put guests here, but it could be guests or members, whether this person is allowed in the team or not. They can say, yes, happy for this person to be in the team. No, I don't want them to be in the team. Or they can accept things like recommendations. And if people don't respond, you've got rules there of what to do. And based on that, people either get removed from the team or they can stay in the team. So this is really important for those more confidential type teams or teams with guests in them. So for this one important thing, you do need at least the same number or more Azure AD Premium 2 licenses for the reviewers. So if you've got 100 team owners, then you'd need at least 100 Azure ADP 2 licenses. So with the guest lifecycle management, there's lots of things you can do with guests. So when you invite a guest in, what you're doing is you're creating an Azure AD B2B account. So you can put controls on that because they've got an identity within Azure AD. You can have conditional access policies, various other things added. So this means you can put a lot of control. So this is just some of my kind of top tips really for managing the guest. So what you can do is you can control who invites guests. You might want to restrict it to a group of people. You might only want to have guests from approved partners or suppliers, so named organizations. So the guest comes in and they would redeem their invitation with their own credentials, and you can then enforce them to register for multi-factor authentication because you don't know what security controls are on their devices. So having MFA is really important, and you may want them to accept some terms of use, conditions of service, etc. Because you do that for internal people, and particularly if you're kind of, say, for example, ISO 27001 compliant, you need to be able to ensure that people are aware of those IT security policies. Well, this is a way that you can push those out to guests. And then once the guest joins the team, you can put other controls in. So with conditional access, make sure that they sign in every day with MFA, do a quarterly access review. So every quarter, their access is reviewed, and if they don't need to be in the team, they can be removed. We can also remove their accounts as well. And you can have something, say, like a yearly reacceptance of their terms of use. So again, I've got a kind of a blog article on that with a little bit more information. So let's kind of dive in specifically now about a guest self-access review. And what we're going to look at here is one that not only reviews the access to the team, but will actually delete that Azure AD B2B account, a fully automated process. And the really good news with this is you need one Azure AD Premium 2 account to enable the Azure AD access reviews. That's all, only one account. Because what we're going to do is we're going to get the guests to self-review. And with guests licensing, the first 50,000 monthly active users, so have free licensing for Azure AD Premium 1 and Premium 2. So as long as you've got less than 50,000 active guests per month, you only need the one license, because you need the license to enable the functionality. And as long as the guests are going to do their review, they don't need to pay for the licenses. So step one would be, we create a security group that contains all guests. Easiest way to do with that is to create a dynamic security group and have the roles, user type equals guests. Every time a guest is created, they will automatically go into the security group. That's the group we're going to do an access review on. So not all teams. There is one that says all teams and groups for guests. Don't use that one, but create a security group. Then we create the access review for that one group. So again, we must highlight, don't do the one all guests in team, because you cannot delete their Azure AD B2B account with that one. So you have to do it this way. So we create the access review. We're going to set it up to be a self review. So the guests are going to review, therefore we don't need licenses for the guests. If the guest does not respond or says, I don't want access anymore, we'll remove them from the team. So that's the same as that previous process that we looked at for kind of guests or members. But what we can now do is add some additional controls on place. So it says this box here, upon completion of the settings. So what we can do now is we can say we want to block the user from signing in for 30 days and then remove the user from the tenant. So that's what you want. Now you can only do this when you do an access review on a group and for guests only. So what will happen is the guest is blocked from signing in for 30 days. Obviously, if they want access, they can let someone know and they can be unblocked. After 30 days, their Azure AD B2B account is deleted. Now, it's a soft delete for 30 days, and then it's permanently deleted. But it's not too much of a worry for guests and team. If they did need access, they can just re-invite them again. But it's a way of tidying up all of those loose ends, because people, like the team owners, will remove a guest from their team. And what will happen is you end up with guest sprawl as well after a while. Again, the details on this, if you scan the QR code, will take you to my blog post on exactly how to do that. Then we've got owner list groups and teams. So this is important because the group owners, as I've mentioned before, are accountable for their team. They're the people who decide which members are going to come into their team, their guests. They are responsible for the content within their team and activities and the rules. Now, if the owner leaves the organisation and somebody in IT deletes their account without checking to see if they were owners of any groups or teams, then this is where you end up with this ownerless teams. If you try and delete yourself as an owner in a team, just from the user interface, it will say, oh, you can't, you're the last owner, add somebody else in. So you'd have to promote a member to be an owner, and then you can take yourself out. But people don't tend to remember that when they're leaving an organisation. They just leave. IT then just remove all the accounts, and you end up in this kind of ownerless state. It's important. We just talked about access reviews and potentially the team owners reviewing membership. And we'll talk about other things on the life cycle where the team owner is critical as well. So Microsoft have got this functionality. It's called ownerless groups. It's for Microsoft 365 groups and teams as well. So it's in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Because all you can see in Teams are the screenshot in the left-hand side. You just kind of see this little warning message just to say there are no owners. That's all it does. Now, that's fine on a test tenant. You know, as you can see here, I'd hardly got any teams, so it's really easy for me to see that. I was speaking to somebody today, and they had 160,000 teams. How are you supposed to scroll through a list of 160,000 teams and try and spot the ones that have no owners? Because you can't filter. So pretty unusable in the Teams Admin Center. So what you can do in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, it's under the settings. and then the settings for the Microsoft 365 groups is you can trigger a request that will go to the team members to say, hey, would you like to become a team owner? As an example of a notification here. Personally, I don't think it's very useful. A team owner is accountable. You don't want any random person coming over and taking ownership of the team. So, you want to make sure the right person is. So I personally don't use this. So what I've done is I've created a Power Automate. So I do love Power Automate and how you can automate things just so simply. Again, I've got a blog on this, so you can create your own version of this too. So this is just an instant trigger. So it's part of that leavers process or that movers process. You're notified that somebody's leaving the organization. It's an instant trigger. All you need to do is put the user's email address in. And what it does is it goes through the back end and it's looking for any groups or teams that the user is a owner of. If the user is an owner of one or more group or teams, then it's going to notify the owner and assign that, so it's going to notify the manager of that leaver, and it's going to add the manager as the owner of the teams. Because rather than just randomly saying, does anyone want to take ownership, what you're doing is you're putting the responsibility onto the manager as part of that kind of movers and leavers process, saying, that team was owned by somebody in your department. You are now responsible for assigning that ownership for the team, because the poor person in the IT service desk is not going to know who it should be kind of the new owner. And it's really difficult from an admin viewpoint to see teams where somebody is an owner of. You can see teams and groups that they're a member of, but you have to go into everyone one by one. People just don't have the time. So this is a really quick way of pushing that responsibility on to the manager to say, the person in your organization is leaving, do something about it. And then the manager can then reassign ownership if they don't want it. So we've gone through a little bit about some of my top tips on creating the teams and then managing the members and the guests within the teams to make sure kind of really the right people have access to the right content, the right amount of time. Now let's look at some of that life cycle management. So the first one is really reporting. So you can export out from the Teams Admin Center a list of your teams and your team's usage. Quite useful. There's an extract of it up here on the screens. You can see whether people are active, whether they're doing things in the teams, etc. But the key thing with the teams reporting is it's showing active teams. And you can show active teams for the last 7, 30 or 90 days. Really, for life cycle governance, we want to look for inactive teams, those teams that haven't been used and therefore should be closed down. So what you'll find is you might have 500 teams and you might have a report that only shows 100 of them. So there's no way of actually getting at that inactive team. The only way you can do it is get a report out like this and then pull out a report of all of your teams and then cross-reference them. So it's a bit clunky. So the out of the box stuff is no good for that. What it is useful for, it will allow you to quickly highlight teams with the same display name. Therefore, that is a risk of data overexposure, people posting information into the wrong teams. So you can kind of filter or sort or do pivot tables looking on that display name. So that's useful for that. Useful to see guests. We can see how many guests you've got in the team. You can see the privacy of the team, but what you can't see is the sensitivity labels for those groups and teams. So that's quite useful. So, for example, if you have teams where you didn't have sensitivity labels and we decided we're going to implement them with internal and external, we run the PowerShell scripts and it all works fine. However, if you had guests in those teams that you've now told they're going to be internal only, those guests would still have access. So again, it's worth looking at that and trying to cross-reference. But as you can see with this report, I can't see those sensitivity labels. So the only other thing you can use is if it is all zeros into kind of messages, meetings, reactions, etc., then you know that the team has been quiet for a while, but it must have had some activity within that reporting period to be in here. So really what you need to do with reporting, you've either got to create your own reports or again have a third-party solution for that. Now, there's another, you can look at some of your teams, but this is really your view as a team owner. You can go in and see how active your teams are. So this is where we should be pushing again that responsibility for lifecycle management to the team owner. They should be deciding at what point should this team close. It has no purpose. The purpose is finished. The project is closed. It shouldn't just sit there forever. So you can go in and have a look and you can see your activity, what's been happening. So this is a view of the last 90 days. And you can see that there are active users in there and you can see that something is happening. But if you saw it was all kind of nothing, all zeros, then you might think, oh, actually, nothing's happened for 90 days. Am I really going to use this again? So once you've got that decision, you say, well, actually, I don't want this team anymore. The purpose is finished. Now what do I do? So you've got an option of archiving a team. So the team owner can do this. So you can archive it and you can make the SharePoint site read-only as well. So the membership will stay the same. And what it does is it just freezes that activity. So you can't do anything with it anymore. But it's still going to show up on your list of teams. This is useful if you're maybe doing an activity that happens kind of infrequently. So it might be once a year, you might want to freeze it and then come back to it. But other than that, it's kind of, I would say, not that useful if we're going to use expiration policies, which I will show you in a minute. It will impact that as well. So if you've got an expiration review and the team isn't active, then it's going to flag as a team to be deleted. And if nobody does anything, it will get deleted. It's not reducing your team sprawl. It's not reducing down your total file storage because everything is still there. So the recommendation is if you have a use case for archiving teams, have a process to remove them from the expiration policy. You need to script that with PowerShell because you can't do that out of the box. So now let's look at this group expiration workflow. So what this allows you to do is allows you to look at groups and teams and SharePoint sites and review them on a regular basis, every 3 months, every 6 months, every year, and say, has this still got a purpose? Now, what will happen with the process, it will look to say, is the team active? If people are sharing documents in SharePoint, if they visit a team channel, if it's a group, if they're sending emails, for example, then the system knows that something's happening and it will automatically renew it for the next time. So really, expiration policies are looking at those inactive teams and it's going to send a message to the owner to say, do you still need this? Yes or no. If the person says yes, then it gets renewed for the next 6 months. If they say no or they don't action it, it will get deleted. So that is the team deleted, a SharePoint site with all the files in it will get deleted, everything, unless it's got a retention policy on it. So again, really important accountability with that team owner. If you're using this functionality, which is good for controlling teams and making sure only active teams are kept. One is team owners need to know what they're doing, because otherwise if they ignore it, the team gets deleted. And B is Teams is really for transient data. If you've got final copies of information, they're probably best stored somewhere else for longer term retention. That way, when the project is finished, for example, you close the team down. If you've got files in there you want to keep forever, well, then you can't delete the whole team because of 1 or 2 files. It's not the best use of resources. So think about what data to store when and what time in the life cycle. So Toxic, if group is not renewed, it expires. Expiration will delete your team. So recommendation here is making sure those team owners know what they're doing. So the team now gets deleted if somebody hasn't responded to that expiration review, or the team owner can delete the team as well. So what happens is, in the deletion, a team is made up of different pieces of functionality. So you've got your Microsoft 365 group in Azure AD. So that group object is managing the permissions and the membership. That gets deleted. The Exchange mailbox that's used for kind of meetings, etc., is deleted. All the Teams channel messages, the SharePoint site. If you've got planner plans attached to your team, etc., that all gets deleted, soft deleted for 30 days. So you can restore it. So yeah, an IT person can restore the team. However, you can only restore it from Microsoft 365 Admin Center or Azure AD. So you can't go into the Teams Admin Center and restore a team. It's a group object, so it's in another 2 places to look at. Warnings here, data is irrecoverable. Nikki?
Yep, real quick, there's a question.
Sorry.
No, that's totally okay. This is great. There's a question. Jake, do you want to just come off mute? If you can.
Yeah, thank you. It was too much to type. So in some of my testing that I've done with group expirations, when you set a group to expire, I've had it where, okay, they get the notification and then they click on the link and then that renews it. Am I doing something wrong, or is that, do you know if that's by design?
Yeah, so that's by design. So the big button is a big button to make it easier. Click here to renew, because they think that's what people to do. I think if you look further down the bottom of the email, it says if you don't want this team, click here or something.
Right, but what I'm getting at is like 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road, somebody's going to turn around and be like, oh, I don't remember what this team was. Let me go look at it. And now it's now renewed for another year.
Potentially, yeah. So that
okay.
is.
I just want to make sure that I was doing that right, or at least that's how I understood it. So if you confirmation, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, so they're going to be looking in activity within that last window of the 30 days before the team's renewed. So they're going to say, if people are doing stuff. So yeah, if somebody's just happened to go in there and had a look at it, it would automatically renew. So there, again, a lot of there's limitations with stuff. So that's why I said reporting is really useful on this, because these aren't the only solutions. You have to look at other ways and rely on reporting, or ideally a third-party solution really that has all of the functionality built in.
Definitely, thank you.
No problem. If you have any further questions, if the hand raising's not worked, just post something in the chat to say you have a question. So with deletion, so we can delete as a team owner. Again, more important, they need to know what delete means. It's going to be lost. Is there a way for users to determine their own team ownership? I'm not sure, actually. You might be able to. I'm just trying to think. If you go down to the bottom of your Teams app, there's a cogwheel there, and then that cogwheel that'll give you a list of all the teams that you're in, and it will show you whether you're a member or an owner. So that's on the. If you look at your list of all your teams, I might be able to bring it up. So let me just quickly swing this over. So here's a list of teams. So we're talking about this cog down here under teams. So it's a list of 7 teams here, and these are the members. So I'm a member of all of them except this one here, where I'm the owner of it. So that's how to quickly see what you're responsible for. Okay. Check. Yeah, so back to deletion really. So really important, again, the team owner team is deleted. You can restore, but only from Azure AD or the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, not directly in Teams. and for whatever reason, so kind of the recommendation here is really keep what you need and delete the rest. You know, if you look at a lot of stuff that happens in Teams, it's kind of information that was useful at the time, but do you really need to keep that long term? Often the information you need to keep long term is in some form of documentation. So my best practice is the team owners should look at that. Maybe you have a separate document library within your team, or a folder in one of your channels, or even another channel. Put all your final documents there, and then when the project or activity ends, then you can say, well, all of these documents I need to keep, because it's all in one folder. You can then just move it to another SharePoint site, for example, where you may say, I need to keep all my project documentation and I need to store it over here. Makes it a nice, easy process. And that way you can delete the team rather than keeping the team just because 4 documents might need to be read in the future. So on to retention policies now. So this is another way we can manage information. So we can delete the teams, as we've just shown, but then we can have retention policies that apply to either the SharePoint site within the team, the chat messages, and the channel messages. So you've got 3 roles: retain only, retain and delete only. Key thing to remember here is Teams chat and channel messages. They are hosted in an Azure Cosmos database that is outside of the kind of Microsoft 365. That's where the instant messaging is all happening. And you can't go and delete whole Teams threads, etc. You haven't got that capability. The only way you can permanently delete Teams information is via a retention policy, and that retention policy will go through, and if it's based on a user, then it deletes the one-to-one and group chats. If it's on the team, then it will permanently delete the chats. So a lot of organizations have quite short retention policies, particularly around Teams chat, because Teams chat should just be ad hoc. Business activities should be done in channel conversations. And yeah, so delete, say, for example, the shortest one is after 24 hours, things get deleted. Sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's a month, because it is just transient information. And obviously, the more data you keep, the bigger the risk is of data overexposure. So really important that you have retention policies on chat and channel messages. And you may or may not want them on the SharePoint site. My preference is to move the final documentation to another kind of more archive SharePoint sites, and then you can delete the team. Again, and the reason for that is you probably don't want to retain everything in that SharePoint site. You know, keep what you need, delete what you don't. So there's 2 ways that we have with retention policies, really. So the traditional way is what's called static policy scope. So we can say, I want a policy and I want it to apply to all of my SharePoint sites. Keep things retained for 5 years. Or your Exchange mailboxes, all users, your OneDrive, all users, or my team sites, all my team sites. Or you can say, I want a group, these particular team sites or SharePoint sites. So that was how it used to only work. And that was quite difficult when you've got local legislation in different countries. So, for example, your rules and regulations in the US are probably different to those in the UK, and you might need to keep personal data or delete personal data after a particular period of time. So how can you manage that when you're a large organization across boundaries? So this is where adaptive policy scopes comes in. It does need the E5, A5 compliance licensing. But what it allows you to do is, in the simplistic way, it allows you to tag, say, for example, your SharePoint sites and your teams with different rules. So you can say, this is a UK one, this is a US, this is Germany, this in here, it was US marketing, US sales. And then you can use those tags to basically create these adaptive policy scopes. So for users, you can use things like if department equals or if country equals. For SharePoint, it gets a little bit more complicated. You need to kind of put some metadata on the SharePoint site, have that exposed. to do that. So only really needed, I would say, in organisations where you're working across different countries, because you may well have different retention rules that you need to comply with. So decisions here, do you need to have, do you have local compliance needs? If you do, this is really useful. You know, not all data is the same. Some organisations just keep everything for 5 years just in case. Not a good idea, particularly, I'm in the UK, so we have to comply with GDPR. And for personal data, you know, it states you only keep it for as long as there's a business need for it. Apart after that, you must delete it. So it gets quite tricky if you've got personal data and other data in SharePoint sites, and you're trying to put policies around it all. You can put retention labels on individual files, gets a bit more tricky. And nearly at the end. So the summary. So we've looked at why team sprawl occurs, and if you haven't investigated any of your teams or done an audit of them, I'll guarantee you do have team sprawl. The biggest risks of team sprawl, it is really about reducing your data risk. You know, 10 times more data, 10 times the risk should there be an incident. We looked at the 5 A's of Teams governance and really saying it's not all about the technology. You know, it's having that accountability, it's having that adoption, it's having that analytics to be able to keep on top of all those changes and automating things. And then we looked at how Microsoft controls can support us. So we looked at Teams creation, identity governance, and lifecycle management. So, well, I've implemented Teams governance. How have you? So thank you very much. Again, there's a QR code if you want to get in touch with me. I'm sure I'll put my details in here shortly if you want to reach out to me. And do you have any questions?
Awesome. We do have just a comment. Great information,
Yep.
Nikki. Definitely an important topic. It really is. Are there any third-party solutions that you like
Yep.
to recommend for this?
Yeah, so we're a partner with a company called Orchestra. Really great product. So it does that governance of teams, groups, SharePoint sites, but it takes it one step further. So as well as having kind of like the Teams templates, you can customize like your SharePoint libraries, you can put apps in, so you can pre-build all these different templates. You can put approval workflows in place with a lot of this. You can do all the life cycle governance, so you can have your own bespoke rules. So where I said my preferred choice is moving the data outside of Teams and storing it elsewhere, you can automate all of those processes as well. So if anybody's interested, please reach out to me. I'm happy to get a 21-day trial to anyone who wants to kind of have a look further. Other benefits are kind of like using this is that you've got all the reporting and the analytics as well. And guest management is coming to it soon as well. So another one, does Microsoft integrate well with third parties retention software? I'm sorry, I can't answer that one. I don't know. I think it would probably all depend on the software. So are you talking about retaining the more like a backup and having the data stored outside? So potentially you can have rules on that. So that's another important thing to think about is Microsoft 365 is a SaaS software. It's a shared responsibility model. Data belongs to the customer, doesn't belong to Microsoft. Too many people think that, oh, you know, my data's safe. It's Microsoft's manage it in the cloud. It's, you know, it's got redundancy because it's being hosted in 2 data centers. That's fine from a technological thing. A lot of incidents happen because of people issues. Somebody goes in there and presses delete on the wrong information and you've lost it. So think about that as well. So it's third party solutions. Yes, Michelle's just put some options in there as well. So Smash and Beam. Any more? Okay, well, thank you very much for having me this evening. And it's evening for me, so it's just coming across to 8 p.m. So I think we do have a question really from Randy. Do you want to come off mute? Oh, no question. Okay. Okay, well, thank you ever so much. I'm going to drop off now. As I say, it's 8 o'clock in the evening in the UK, and it's still nearly 90 degrees here, and I'm melting.
Well, thank you. This has been wonderful. Love having you here, Nikki, and can't wait to see you again. Join our user group.
Yeah, okay. So thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Wonderful. Have a wonderful evening.
Cheers. Bye.
All right, now we're going to move into our next topic with George Bryant on MDM. George, are you ready to join us and hopefully share your screen without any problems? All right, can see you.
Yeah, cool. I apologise. I'm pretty sure you all thought you were done with English accents, but you are not. So you'll have a lot of fun with this one too. All right, so I'm going to condense mine down a little bit, which is completely okay. It just means I can take out the boring bits and just share the entertaining bits. So you are all very lucky as a result. It's good, isn't it? Right, we're going to try that screen sharing thing and see how that goes. If it doesn't work, then I'm going to go with the old typical IT part of turn it off and turn it on again. So let's have a go. How we doing? Is that working?
Perfect.
Yes.
Is it perfect for everyone? That's a nice start. Right, so are we good to go?
Yep.
I
Yes,
see
go
no
ahead.
no's, so that's good enough
Go
for me.
ahead.
Right, so brief introduction. I am George Bryant. And Robert puts all the fancy stuff in it. We are based out of Minnesota. Just anywhere around the Midwest is what we primarily serve. So everything we do is really just centered around primarily data analytics, but of course in that ecosystem, everything we touches everything else, be it different sources, different vendors. I think there's a couple of our partners in the call at the moment who we work with on the 365 side, and so we really just come into contact with everything quite often. But today I am going to be talking about master data management in the absence of enterprise master data management. So a little heads up, we are on the analytics side, and I personally am on the more on the data engineering technical side. And so when we're integrating and having these conversations, that is going to be the slant that we're going for. However, everything that comes in here is fully baked in, as I said, with the ecosystem of Microsoft in general and everything that comes with it. But I thought what I'll probably start with is, what is master data management? So I've taken this wonderful quote out of Gartner. I'm not going to read it out loud because ultimately that's boring and that's not how you do presentations. But what we are kind of seeing, what I have kind of put together is, when you Google or Bing these things, this is the list of the primary systems that seem to come up when referring to master data management. The one I'm personally most familiar with is Prophecy. IBM has their own one. There's plenty of master data management tools out there. But ultimately, what master data management is basically there to do is it's there to add uniformity to the data that's going in and out. It provides accuracy by forcing certain things like data types and all those other things. Consistency, because it's that one central place that everyone is able to go through and maintain a lot of the things that come out of master data management, like budget and product and customer and those kinds of things. And of course, accountability. It means if one person messes it up, it kind of gets messed up for everyone. So what we can really say is, a master data management solution, it's a data source. It's a data source that gets used across the company and guarantees consistency between all of the different partners and pieces that were around, specifically large companies. And so it really does become a data source. So you have your data sources like your Dynamics and your F&O and all of these different pieces, and MDM adds an extra complement to that where those things are necessary. So the question ultimately is, why don't we all just use an MDM tool? Well, I took a little snippet from our friend's website at IBM, and I think you can probably see why an MDM tool doesn't suit the vast majority of companies. It's great for all of those Fortune 1 to 500s and all and everything in between. Some it will, some it won't. But ultimately, a full implementation, doesn't matter what one of those tools you generally use, they cost a bit. That's hands down one of the reasons why people don't get it. So need, scale, price, budget, and management. On the price side, that's pretty obvious. On the need side, if someone needs the master data management services, then oftentimes it depends on the size of the company. It depends on what that company is doing. But if you come to the majority of companies start out with something rudimentary, like we need the ability to track and record budget and make sure that it's shared consistently and that everyone's using the same budget. You don't need a full implementation to maintain one thing. You don't need a full implementation to maintain 2 or 3 things. That's when need and scale becomes irrelevant. As you grow, as you get more of these things, those when conversations are going to start changing, and that's where price is allowed to come in, because if you're that large a company and you need the ability to maintain all of these things, then that really gives you the ability to do that, because you now have the budget, you now have all of those things. Management is important, because if you are going to create these things, then you need someone to maintain these things. You can have budget in your master data management, for example, but if there's no one around to maintain it, then that budget is not going to get updated. You're going to go year to year, and people are going to look at their reports and say, well, hang on a minute, it's 2023, I've got no data, this is weird, what's going on? So there has to be the active management of both the tool and the individual data sets that are being created and managed within that system itself. So all this is from the context of Power BI. So if I bring up this piece quickly. Now, I'm very aware that Power BI is something that the market is saturated with demos. It's saturated with people going on LinkedIn saying, oh, look, I made something pretty. I made something cool. I'm not going to do that, because that's really not what I want to do today. There's plenty of other people that can do that. I'm not it. So what I am going to do here, though, is I do want to show you sort of an example of Power BI stuff with the context of what we're going to add to this Power BI data set and how we're going to complement this report. So obviously Power BI has got all these wonderful regional pieces. It allows you to interact, all the good stuff. Everything is great there. What it also does is allows you to drill down, excellent stuff. But what it really does here is sales target. And this is what we're going to focus on for this one specifically, this sales target. Now, with this one, you know what? I might be really clever and have forgotten to have opened it. That's my smartest move ever. With this one, the sales target here is, let's say, you're starting off on your journey. You're saying, I'm a smaller company. I need to put in sales targets. I know I'm going to do, and this is what we did with this one, and this is non-proprietary, no worries there, is we said to create a sales target, we're going to say 1.4 times last year's revenue. And that's a nice and rudimentary way in order to get us to a target, because we feel like we're growing that much. We have some data to support that. That is fine. So ultimately, when you go into the measures piece in here, what you're really seeing is sales target. It's just sales times 1.4. Now, as an organization that's evolving, we're now at a point where we're saying to ourselves, that doesn't work for us anymore. So what we can do with that is really just a lot more. And that's where the master data management concept comes in. Now let me share this again, apologies. So obviously, there's more than one way of doing this. Power BI is such a massive ecosystem. You have a whole collection of data sources. Excel is probably one of the most common in my opinion. SQL servers are not far behind, but ultimately there's a billion different ways of doing a billion different things. Now, when it comes to the ad hoc data sets, one that you're just creating, you know, you're just playing with Power BI, you just want to see what kind of output comes in, you know, grabbing an Excel document straight out of SharePoint, straight out of your file system, it doesn't really matter. You can build your ad hoc data sets in Power BI, and that's functional, and that works, and that's good. You can go to the next level and say, well, we've got our, say we have our enterprise data repository, data warehouse, data mart. There's so many different names. Some you're supposed to use, some you're not supposed to use. I don't know anymore. But your SQL server, where all your data resides, hopefully normalized and cleaned up. And then people add things like budget directly from Excel, straight out of SharePoint, and add things in this way. Now, what we're going to focus on today is this bottom one, the SharePoint Enterprise Data Management sort of structure, because you don't need the full enterprise scale tool. You don't need any of those other pieces. Ultimately, all you need is just the ability to have a repository for your data that can be managed, and the ability to show that through in a Power BI system. And so, of course, you know, people can ask the question of what about this niche element? What about these different scenarios? There are 1,000 different scenarios. We can even say up front that logic apps are basically, you know, not to massacre it. Power Automate and logic apps are of great similarity. Blob storages, data lake generation 2. There's a lot of interchangeability there to some degree, depending on whether you want things hierarchical or not. And all these different tools can be intertwined. So this is just a demo, an example of how all these things can be put together to create just that rudimentary story and all that fun stuff. So I will get started with a demo, because that's the exciting stuff. So when we start out any journey, one thing that nearly all companies use is Teams. We've had Nikki go on for full details. I think following along with everyone else in the world has the same kind of team sprawl and all those different things. But what we're focusing on here is really just how Teams has this beautiful piece here. It's built upon SharePoint. I don't know the details. I don't know the fundamentals. That's for people that know that side of the well. But what we have here is that we have the ability to put something into a file, and you know, then you can open it in SharePoint. And so with that ability, you can go in and you can interact and you can play around and you can see what's there. And that's sort of where the power of a lot of these things go. So we have our sales budget file here. So what I've done is I've made it nice and easy. We have the pieces that we need, year, month, probably not in the best format, but that's what the data was in. We're going to do it by sales rep is what we're doing it. So there's a few different sales reps here. And rather than coming up with arbitrary targets, coming out from a 1.4 algorithm, you know, theoretically, we're going to base things a lot more on, well, how did they do last year? What's their growth trajectory? How long have they been with the company? So people are going to need the ability to work numbers a lot more over time. Now, obviously, when it comes to creating budgets for sales reps, they're normally a derivative of other budgets from elsewhere, company budgets or any other sort of orientation where things can be broken down. But in this scenario, that's what we're going for. We're going from the perspective of the sales rep. So as we go through there, one of the things that we really are, which is pretty wonderful about how it all works, is that we have the Azure environment. And so what we've created in the Azure environment is the ability to have a file in SharePoint, pretty standard, just sitting there in any SharePoint team. We can do it through lists also, but just having it in SharePoint where everyone generally creates their repositories. You can manage things based on how you want people to see things and who you want to modify as well, which is another big part of it. But it can just be the repository that we're able to get to. So, and once it's there, bring it all the way through to Power BI. So the first step with that is to create a logic app. Now, if you're familiar with logic apps, then Power Automate, sorry, then you're consistently going to be familiar with logic apps. This, when a HTTP request is received, I can go further into this, but this is a trigger. All logic apps require a trigger to start and then can be followed by subsequent actions. The trigger in this case is going to be that and I'll show you just in a little bit longer and how that will be applied and where it gets applied and why it's a really cool function of how a lot of the ecosystem works. So what we've got is the ability to go through to any team that you have access to, obviously. So that access can be controlled. It's controlled through my own individual one. It's got the file location. You can navigate directly through it. And then all of the content types inferred. Yep. So when you get to this piece, obviously there's different ways of doing this part. And this is quite an important piece to know. You can go for an individual file. If you know what that file is going to be. So if you know what budget is, you know it's going to have the same consistent name always, then you can go to the individual file. But there's going to be scenarios where, excuse me, someone wants to call it something slightly differently. You can have a series of files that all correlate into one thing that could have different names. Through this get file content, there are other ways of doing it. You can go through and get the file metadata instead, and then feed that through, and then have wildcards in order to pick up everything. So it's not a one file only system. You can have all of your files in one place and then have certain naming conventions. You can have multiple different methods. You can have different files and different folders which hold the files. It really is down to how you want to manage it and what makes it the simplest. And that's going to be down to every single person is going to manage it differently. Every single client is going to want to manage it differently, but that's the key. In this scenario, we're going directly for a specific file just to keep it simple and to make sure it's good and consistent. So as you grab things through that logic app, you can then create it into blob storage. And so with that, you just got to put the file contents from the previous step, from the previous action, give that blob a name, and away we go. So if we come back from here, as we run it, we can see it's going to the file in our SharePoint system, which is here. Running it through, grabbed it. And so now what we'll see is if we go to our storage account, and this is a flat storage account, this isn't data lake or anything. We're going to look directly in our storage container and we can find our file has been written directly there. 211.44. This is the same file that was just there and it's just been run into there. And so now we have it located in blob storage. That's where we want it to be because that's where we can pick up the next step. So if we go back to the logic app piece, I want to reference back to the HTTP request. So this URL that gets created here, this is a great URL. You can copy that, and then basically when it comes to automation, and this is Data Factory for people that are less familiar, you can reference this piece in here, this URL. It's a post method, which it does tell you within the HTTP post URL. So that helps you navigate through. It means that when you set your trigger, and you can either have your trigger to set at a certain time every morning, multiple times a day, you can do that however you like. It's really down to how you want to trigger these things, how you want the data to refresh. As you pick up that trigger, or as it picks up that trigger, it then runs it into the data lake, as we've said. And then from there, it automatically, just as part of the linear design, it picks up that blob storage sales budget, and then it moves it over to your SQL database. Now, the scenario around the SQL database, as we refer back to the, is that when you get to an enterprise level architecture, 9 times out of 10, what the customer really wants and what people really want to do is they want all the data in the same place. If all of your data is in SQL Server and you want to add an Excel spreadsheet in, in order to manage things, or you want to add it into a database so that you can then process hierarchies within the SQL Server. That's ultimately the aim. By having it in the SQL Server, it does give you that central repository for where all of your data resides. It allows everything to sort of come in, flow, and sit there and have that central piece, which is very important when you get to large-scale architecture. Because when you do get the large-scale architecture, how you design your Power BI is going to be very important. And therefore, the majority of the power that you do want is going to be run on the SQL Server behind it, because that's where the majority of the power, that's where the power really can reside. And so by making everything flat, by making everything consistent, when you do create your Power BI data set, you are able to scale a lot higher, you are able to scale a lot quicker, you are able to make sure that the data set, even if it does get large, when you do trigger those refreshes as and when needed, that's more efficient and optimized also. So in this scenario, yes, we're running everything into the SQL Server database. In this scenario, it will clear up what was there before, and you can push everything back in. Being that Data Factory is a data movement tool and has a whole lot of capabilities, if you do have scenarios where you want to increment things instead of holistically deleting it out, so if you want to add monthly budget, you want to make incremental changes, or you want to record change capture, you're able to do that by just configuring things either with a for each loop, or just configuring things by just being additive instead of truncating. So what we're doing in this scenario is we clear the table, and then we load it back in. And so just by making sure everything is lined up, this is the source, this is the target, everything is good, we can run it through and it will populate the data just as we like. So as we've seen, and Data Factory is a cool tool if you haven't used it. It's luckily it's much easier to use than SSIS. I don't know if anyone has familiarity there. It also crashes a lot less. In fact, it does. I don't think I've had it crash before, which is absolutely amazing because I hate it when it crashes. But I do like when a demo works. This makes me happy, and it's completed in 13 seconds. So you can see the efficiency that's coming from there. So now we're in the SQL Server itself, the MDM. This is the table it's been run into. So now we have all of that data that started off in the Excel spreadsheet. It's now been pushed into here. Everything is available and everything is good. So what does that mean for us here? So now we have the ability to create this additional table. We have the ability to create and add to this demo as we see fit. We have our date, we have our people, we have our returns, which is slightly obscured, but that's fine. All of these pieces are there. So what we're going to do here is, I always like to have a backup, sorry. Easiest way I've always found to interact with Power BI, and this is sneaky, I've got no doubt about that, and I'm happy about it, is, oh, it's over there, sorry. Can now use our Azure database as a source. We can grab our and so now theoretically, and I'm very aware, even though it's obvious this isn't all data, this isn't all coming out of SQL Server, but this is sort of the orientation we can have. We can pull it through, we can have that, we can embed it in, and now we have the ability to model things out, model it through, and just sort of give that context for everything else. So when we close and apply that, it will load up that data set as we wanted it. Just like magic. Excellent. There we go. So it's loaded in. It likes to do the automatic work where it goes through into here and it says, you know what, I'm going to try and cleverly put things together. And then that's what it does. So as you can see, we've modeled it into person. The next thing we need to do is model it into the year month piece. Now, there is a little bit of Power BI here that I'm going to do because I think it's one of the coolest tools that are around. And that is the ability for Power Query. I think at this point, probably most people at least have some context as what Power Query is. I think a lot of people probably have the context of what it does. And a few of you have probably had complete hands-on throughout this consistently. One of my favorite things to do is, one thing that's very important about Power BI is the granularity conversation. Now, one thing that's hard about sales pieces is that it's oftentimes when it comes to things like budget, they're not the same granularity as your transactions. Your transactions happen every day. It's a wonderful thing, but it does happen every day and it can be frustrating. So in that scenario, you do have to sort of work with your model in order to have things join up. Now, there is the ability to do many-to-many. I don't know how many people are familiar with doing many-to-many relationships. I've been working with many-to-many relationships in various different ways for a very long time. My personal preference is to have your many-to-many relationship work in a way that you understand and trust. So when you do a connection between year month and year month, it will reference that there'll be some that you have to understand the knowledge. It will reference how that stuff works. However, I am built from an old school version back from the analysis services days, Azure analysis services and all those pieces, where sometimes it's just easier to be in control of your own fate. And so one of the things I generally tend to do is that I still believe in the power of a bridge table. I've done that to the wrong one, haven't I? Yes. Well, that's good because I can just do that. So as you can see, it's automatically tried picking up the relationship here. Just grab it from year month to year month. What we actually want it to do, though, is we want it to interact with the date table. So how it's basically working, it's working it as a style scheme. So this is going in here. But what we want it to do, for consistency, to make sure everything is working as we want, we actually want this one to be a both. So as you do this, it goes through, it manages it in there, and it's all good. So the input is going directly into sales budget. So this bridge table, hide it away. It just means your year month can interact with year month. You don't have to worry about the granularity because it's doing a lot of the work for you. So now, as we go into here, we have the dim date with year month pieces. I must have hidden it in this one, apologies. We now have the sales budget, and we can now break up the sales budgets by this, by date, and of course by person, and apply those algorithms and those DAXs in all the different places where we want to. So the model's connected, everything is working, and we can now go through and work through those sales rep summaries and working on those, the variances, and the difference between the sales and all of their goals across everything. And so by the ability to add this piece, we now have the control of it. We now have the granularity that we can work with. We now have the ability to go through and just really make sales targets something much more tangible and much more useful as an organization. So that, from the highest level, is how to put all those pieces together end to end in order to bring it into your Power BI and do a lot of those pieces. Now, I'm aware of that being a lot of information. So ultimately, what's beautiful about the architecture, certainly when you come to the enterprise side, is a lot of it really just does rely on the fact that you already have a lot of data systems in place. You already have your data factory picking up your data from various different sources, be them your finance, be them your all the different MDM or ERPs, sorry, that are out there. Excuse me. And it's just allowing the ability to pick up that data and put it in the SQL Server. What this really complements is, it gives you the ability to pick up multiple SharePoint files, bring it through into your SQL Server and have it part of your ecosystem in a controlled manner. It means everything is cleaner, everything is good, and you don't need to spend hundreds of thousands on that master data management tool. And it just sort of makes everything get into Power BI and have that consistency and that integration that you want it to have. So their primary MDM use cases. This part is, I find, relatively large. So sales budgets, and that doesn't have to be by number, that can be by quantity. There's many different avenues of budget. So by product, by rep, by company, you can have it in multiple different ways. By having the control to be able to go out and monitor those budgets, it really gives you the ability to work through those things. Customer navigation. Now, we do also have to bear in mind that a lot of the ERP systems, a lot of the finance systems allows you to create parent-child relationships. But let's look at a program like QuickBooks, for example. QuickBooks allows you to have the customer. It's not good at managing and allowing you to manage who's the parent of a company. It doesn't allow you to really sort of group companies together. So by having the ecosystem where you can say, well, this is the list of companies, you can have it pick up from you can have it be fed into that Excel document from your SQL Server as well, where you have a unique list, and it can be managed internally. You can have the parent-child relationships named out. If there's a new client added, it can just have it, and then you can have those the assigning done by whoever's managing that piece. It allows you to add additional attributes that you may not have the ability to do. It really gives you an extra piece. Now, by all means, it's always going to be better to try and keep everything in-house within its own system. I don't think there's going to be any discussion that pulls away from that. But in the absence of that master data system, it allows you to work through things in that way. Product navigation is going to be something pretty similar. You can have your product group identifications. We have one scenario with a couple of clients that repeats quite frequently. So, and the one is we went into a company and their data governance was something that at that point was at a place of immaturity, and they knew that, and they wanted to help develop the conversation there. So what was happening was there was a definition of what product applies to what group and what definition. It changed from report to report, and it was just a series of inconsistencies. You had ambiguous pieces like if there's parts of a medical piece that can be applied into two different places depending on what mood you're in or how you're trying to track things, it can have differences. So by having that product group identification, having it handled by the product group themselves, that's really been the answer for those ones. It allows you to put those groups into some consistency so that when any report picks it up, you have the ability to have that different navigation or that consistent navigation that puts things in the buckets that you would expect them to be in. Now, there are, of course, scenarios where there might be two definitions and both can be correct, in which case you can have both of those and you can have both hierarchies embedded within the same solution rather than having to always just rely on the one and just sort of the disparity there, because then both are controlled and both have their own specific naming conventions to make sure that as things are created and as things go through, it works very well for that. As for sales reps, that's quite a hard one for track because not all systems have the greatest sales rep pieces. Territory management, and even account management. I've many scenarios where accounts can move. People can move from account to account to account. It's always fun. What's really interesting with sales rep based orientations and the territory management and how things can be assigned is that's what I would consider to be one of those type 2 changes. Because then that way, if anyone does make a change of what account is assigned to who, you can have that change capture. You can say, well, they were assigned it since November 2021, and they've been going through since then. But if something goes wrong and it was discovered that it was in January 2020, that person doesn't have to be the one that's blamed. You can then go and find out where the gap was, who was managing that client at the time, and that change capture becomes a really powerful tool as you go through and you navigate all of these different places. And finally, security. Now, I'm not going to ever take away from Active Directory. Active Directory groups are great. I love Azure Active Directory. I like on-premise Active Directory. I like that they're synced, all these wonderful things. But some companies simply don't support that. I've been into some large enterprise companies where they don't have the ability to support row-level security because they don't have the ability to say who belongs to what group, who goes into what scenario, and how all those things fit together. By having that row-level security support, even as a short-term gap, it allows people to have the ability to truly handle their Active Directory. It allows them to go through and do a lot of that work in order to support a lot of those things. And by having that automated, it really just gives a lot of power to everything that's coming through. It's also a good repository for some of those automated AD group pieces where it can automatically just filter everything through to a file so that it can be reviewed in certain scenarios where that may be. And if Active Directory is not being used for who knows what reason, but we've seen it, then it allows some of that interaction and management to happen all in. But overall, yeah, I've kept it brief. I apologize if that's too brief. But as a result, I am absolutely fine leaving plenty of time for questions and plenty of time for anyone that has any comments or pieces that they would like to see or hear more of.